Mysterious Vanish hunter Aaron Hedges vanished in the Crazies. Then his gear found miles from bones. It was early September 2014 when a hunting trip in Montana took a turn so strange that it remains unsolved. Aaron Hedges, a 38-year-old carpenter, an experienced bow hunter from Bozeman, set out with two friends, Joe and Greg, into the Crazy Mountains. He was known to be quiet, thoughtful, and deeply fond of the wilderness. But this trip would be unlike any other, marked by his sudden disappearance and the unsettling clues left behind. On September 5th, the trio arrived at the Ibex trailhead. In the afternoon, loaded their pack mule and horse, and carried enough gear for a week: hunting bows, a seasonal cache of a wall tent and wood stove, hidden near Sunlight Lake food and survival supplies. They planned to hunt elk rotate camps from Trespass Creek to Campfire Lake, Moose Lake, and finally Sunlight Lake before returning on the 10th. Communication would be maintained via two-way radios, checking in at noon and again after dusk. Within hours of departure, trouble began. The pack mule slipped on rough terrain, scattering supplies. Among the lost gear were Aaron's sleeping bag and extra clothes. Aaron, typically calm and resourceful, reacted poorly, irritable and unfocused, growing distant as the group searched fruitlessly to recover what was lost. That evening they camped beside Trespass Creek. Reports from Joe and Greg describe Aaron as withdrawn and tense. When they reached Campfire Lake the next day, his demeanor worsened, sleeping near the fire, but visibly cold and reluctant to help in setting up camp. He made little conversation, barely spoke of the hunting, and did not inquire about their plan. On September 7th, Aaron surprised them by saying he would head to Sunlight Lake alone to fetch the wall tent and stove. Joe and Aaron were in radio contact at approximately noon. Aaron said he thought he was between Moose Lake and the turnoff to Sunlight Lake, estimating about 7 miles hiked since leaving camp. Joe asked him to return, but Aaron replied he would continue on. At 4:30 p.m. came the final communication. Aaron told Joe he had probably missed the turnoff and was unlikely to return that night. That was the last time anyone heard his voice. On the morning of September 10th, Joe and Greg dismantled camp, administered their slain elk, and hiked back to the trailhead. At no point did they report searching for Aaron or retracing his steps. They assumed he had found his own way out. Upon returning home, Joe texted Aaron, reminding him to check in. Decades of friendship and respect seemed to cause a familiar trust to persist even when contact was lost. But with no reply by evening, concern spread. On September 11th, snow began falling up to 2 feet in places, blanketing trails, erasing footprints, and shutting down rescue operations. By the time rescuers could deploy horses, snowmobiles, and helicopters equipped with FLIR forward-looking infrared, it was already late. They used the coordinates provided by Joe for Sunlight Lake, but equipment caches were misplaced and some coordinates incorrect. Time and nature began to shroud the scene. Months passed before anything of substance was discovered. In June 2015, a local rancher found Aaron's bow hunting backpack leaning against a tree. Inside were his supply of hunting arrows, a handwritten hunting license, and a prescription bottle containing pills, likely the medication he took for alcohol dependency. Surprisingly, Aaron's boots were missing. Investigators concluded he had removed them, perhaps to tread more quietly in slippery terrain. Other items, water bladder, energy drink cans, scattered firewood, suggested he had made a small fire and camped nearby. Then nearly a year later, in August 2016, partial human remains and personal items were discovered about 200 yards from the backpack site, buried beneath brush and fallen pine trees on private land. Taphonomic analysis revealed no signs of foul play. A medical examiner determined Aaron died from exposure. His body weakened, unprotected in harsh conditions, overwhelmed by hypothermia. His death was attributed to natural causes, yet the circumstances remain haunting. Several things stand out as incongruous. First, why would Aaron, an experienced outdoorsman, leave his boots behind in rugged, rocky terrain? Second, the cache coordinates Joe provided were incorrect, causing search efforts to pour over the wrong areas, perhaps a cover-up for his failure to notify rescuers promptly. Third, Aaron's mental state was precarious. His wife, brother, friends, and even his physician noted his mood swings, mood instability, exhaustion, and insufficient recovery from alcohol habit. He may have been combative, suffering withdrawal, and impaired at high altitudes. Joe and Greg's story also revealed inconsistent timelines and shifting details about when and where they camped, what they found, and when they killed the elk. Witness testimony from another hunter undermined their claim of camping near Trespass Creek on September 5th. They admitted to illegally harvesting elk on private land, far from where they'd said. GPS logs from Joe lacked key waypoints, even though the area requires careful navigation to avoid trespassing. Their narrative shows holes, where a man disappeared and two friends remained, not reporting concern, continuing their trip, and later providing vague statements. These things compounding, a man disappears alone, likely disoriented during withdrawal. His friends miss initial signs of distress. Snow buries clues. Then months later, items belonging to him emerge: his pack missing boots and an unguarded campsite. Nearly 2 years later, his partial remains surface in a remote area. There is no indication of violence. The official ruling of death by exposure is believable, but leaves questions. Did Aaron really wander off on his own? Did he intend solitude or self-harm? Why didn't Joe and Greg react sooner? And why did they stop searching after returning to the trailhead? So far, the mystery resists explanation. Exposure is a plausible cause of death, but not a complete answer. Without Aaron's boots or his sleeping bag, we question how he survived long enough to cover the distance where remains were found. Did he deliberately go barefoot through ice? Was he hoping to find help? Did he wander in circles until snow and hypothermia overcame him? And in the center of this stands Joe and Greg, two men who barely began to search for their friend while the wilderness claimed him. Their contradictions cloud the narrative. This part of the story is just the beginning. To uncover what truly happened, we must piece together the timeline, the psychological state of Aaron, the evidence of the items found, and the discrepancies in his friend's statements. In the next section, we will explore those inconsistencies in greater detail, examining the evidence that raises questions hidden beneath the surface official story. The authorities' files begin with careful documentation of the Ibex trailhead departure on September 5, 2014. The trio Aaron, Joe, and Greg checked in with park rangers who noted 3 adult male hunters with horses and a pack mule edge-scratched gear tags, and a group goal of retrieving elk. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until the first report from a nearby hunter contradicted Joe's and Greg's recounting of their campsite location that first night. Instead of Trespass Creek, the witness recalled seeing a campfire nearer to a tributary several miles off their stated course. That discrepancy set off alarm bells, details, and police reports, marked as inconsistent with group narrative. Turning to radio logs at noon on September 7th, Joe told investigators he spoke with Aaron. Joe said the weather was fair, Aaron calm, but the official radio logs show a static-laced, clipped conversation. The tone recorded suggested distress. Joe's narrative described casual talk, but the logs reveal frantic, clipped responses from Aaron, his voice strained, lost, trying. Snow-only fragments survived due to interference. Investigators flagged that transcription as evidence of an altered retelling. Joe's version downplayed Aaron's anxiety. Another anomaly: when Joe and Greg returned to the trailhead on September 10th, they cleaned their gear and drove home without reporting Aaron lost. The police file notes they assumed he left the mountains earlier. That assumption would later be described in their interviews as clear understanding, but the files show no prior plan for Aaron to hike out solo. The written permit camp map and deposit primarily centered on group travel. In October, the sheriff's team obtained GPS tracks from Joe's handheld. On maps, his tracks seemed to avoid the North Trail to Sunlight Lake entirely. The route circles Moose Lake, bisects private farmland near Dead Horse Creek, and cuts westward across restricted land. When questioned, Joe said he opted to bypass rugged terrain, but property records prove certain bypasses cross private ranch land. That required permission or risk of trespass, Joe later admitted, harvesting on private property. Park and county investigators treated that as evidence of carelessness. Evidence collection at the scene in June 2015, Aaron's pack lay propped against a lodgepole pine. Among its contents were a prescription bottle labeled disulfiram, a drug, meant as a deterrent to drinking. His physician confirmed the refill was consumed before the trip, meaning the remaining pills were extra, perhaps hidden. This suggests Aaron either stashed pills for unknown reasons or simply ignored medical advice. Inside the pack also lay his hunting license, a partially completed scorecard, and personal notes scribbled in miniature. One note read, "Choose silence over shots." Missing boots were noted. Search logs mentioned boot imprints leading to the fire site, but no boot tracks from there onward. Investigators found rubber camelback parts, a torn Gore-Tex insole, and a single mixed pair of socks. The forensic team scoured for lost animal bones or visible signs of scavenging. They found shoelacing tied to tree branches nearby, indicating rapid removal of footwear meant for silent elk stalking. The sheriff surmised that Aaron changed shoes to moccasins as he tracked an elk, a standard hunting tactic. The missing shoes suggest he never retrieved them. On August 5, 2016, human remains were found. The case file details a skull was spotted near a pine overhang, partially covered. Bone fragments nearby included ribs, vertebrae, and a long femur, consistent with a single individual. Clothing remnants, including Gore-Tex fragments, matching Aaron's last known jacket, and partially legible labels showing blood-like stains were cataloged. A cell phone frame, shattered but identifiable, lay near the skull. The media report states the remains were consistent with natural exposure. No signs of trauma, hemorrhage, or weaponry were found. The medical files indicate hypothermia, possible cardiac arrhythmia, and ingesting alcohol or withdrawal medication. Still, police pursued a toxicology analysis. His liver enzymes and tissues were tested. Results returned negative for lethal poisoning. Digging further into background interviews, investigators learned Aaron had recently entered an outpatient program for alcoholism, but stopped shortly before the trip. Wife's testimony notes he had been tense, distant, not sleeping. His brother spoke of erratic decisions, unwilling to talk. Worried, Aaron embarked to fight the demons in the mountains himself. Joe was interviewed again in December 2014. He revealed that at around 5 p.m., when he spoke with Aaron, he heard snow shift in the background, then a groan of pain, a detail never shared in initial statements. When pressed why he didn't investigate, Joe said he didn't hear a cry, figured he was hiking down. That contradicted earlier recollections of casual conversation. Greg, in contrast, vaguely described Aaron's departure as energized, like he wanted a moment of silence. Both men said they looked for Aaron the following morning, yet search logs detailed they left the camp unchanged and rode out directly. Whispers developed that their delayed report hindered rescue, while Aaron's essence trod deeper into a stark wilderness. The sheriff was quoted in local news, "Every minute counts in hypothermia." As the investigation progressed, several oddities persisted. Phone metadata. Aaron's cell phone later recovered as fragments had been turned off deliberately. The date stamp last present read, September 7th at 6:45 p.m., 2 hours after his final radio call. Investigators surmised he powered off the device, perhaps to conserve battery or avoid detection, which removed his digital breadcrumbs. The only blood found near the skeleton was venous and clotting, common in hypothermia fatalities, not trauma. However, a drop or two of blood appeared in the backpack interior ring, undated and untraceable. Family anxieties. Aaron's younger sister sent a handwritten letter to detectives requesting they treat Joe and Greg's inconsistencies with scrutiny. She expressed worry he might have been too unwell, not just lost. Wildlife reports confirmed raccoon and fox activity in the area since spring 2015. A search on August nights in 2016 noticed recently disturbed ground and hair partly animal, but mixed with human fibers matching Aaron's fleece. Multiple hypotheses circulated. 1. Accidental death by exposure, forged by intent withdrawal. Hypothermia, isolation equipment loss, while his friend's delayed report eliminated chance rescue. 2. Voluntary disappearance, self-harm. Aaron may have planned an intentional solo retreat to detox and perhaps succumbed after going off-grid. 3. Negligence or concealment. Joe and Greg intentionally gave false directions to rescue teams to obscure their lack of effort, risking life for pride. 4. An unseen predator. While no harm, footsteps, or injuries were recorded, a predatory animal may have scavenged the body after hypothermia, altering the position. Each theory has weaknesses. Wilderness exposure deaths are common, but usually involve identifiable bodies found quickly. Aaron's remains were only found nearly 2 years later, far from camp, suggesting he wandered for days, which contradicts the drug-precipitated collapse hypothesis. Self-harm seems unlikely for a hunter, so immersed in recovery, but emotional distress and isolation could have driven irrational behavior. The idea of negligence by friends is troubling, but no admission or motive beyond embarrassment emerged, although the GPS discrepancies from Joe are stark. Inside the investigative room, sheriff's logs note that although the official death certificate was filed as accidental exposure, the case remains open. In October 2016, file entries mention a continuing review of friend testimony, GPS data, and phone metadata. Internal papers highlight that Joe and Greg's story must be cross-checked with additional witnesses and search records. In summation, the police files show no definitive foul play, but they reveal a suffocation of clarity, contradictions, delays, missing shoes, late reporting, and a fragmented timeline. Each anomaly points to oversight that may have cost Aaron his only chance at rescue. The misplacement of coordinates, the dismissed radio logs, the inconsistent GPS, they all beg, the question was, this just tragedy or something waiting to be uncovered? Before Aaron stepped into the crazy mountains on that September morning, there were signs that his journey might be more than a hunting trip. Friends described him as distracted and emotionally distant. His doctor's notes referenced ongoing challenges with alcohol dependency, anxiety, and compliance with treatment. According to his wife Angela, the decision to go hunting had caused tension at home. She had begged him not to go, not because she feared for his safety in the wilderness, but because she feared he wasn't ready to be alone with himself. 2 weeks before the trip, Aaron had stopped attending outpatient rehab. His last appointment ended with an unresolved conversation about medication adherence. He'd been prescribed disulfiram, a drug meant to deter drinking by causing violent reactions if alcohol is consumed, but the last refill had been picked up early. When found later in his backpack, the bottle still contained pills, suggesting Aaron may have taken them sporadically or not at all. Whether he drank during the trip remains uncertain, but Joe's testimony implied he was. He was drinking on the way up, Joe told detectives, then got moody like flipping a switch. The police interviewed Aaron's brother Robert, who confirmed that Aaron had spoken about drying out in nature. He romanticized solitude, Robert said, but he wasn't stable. Not then, Angela agreed. She recalled Aaron pacing for hours the night before he left. He couldn't sit still, couldn't sleep. Said the air in town felt wrong. These details painted a portrait not just of a hunter, but of a man on the edge, possibly walking into the wilderness to confront his demons alone. Mental health professionals, brought in to advise the sheriff's department, reviewed these statements and offered a chilling possibility Aaron may have entered early alcohol withdrawal during the hike. Symptoms include confusion, irritability, hallucinations, and impaired coordination, especially dangerous in a rugged environment. Delirium tremens can kill, one consultant noted, especially without supervision. One note recovered from Aaron's pack raised eyebrows. A folded paper marked with trail scribbles bore the words, "No one can fix it but me." It was undated. Investigators interpreted it as possibly linked to his struggles, but it could also have referred to his plan to fetch supplies from the Sunlight Lake cache. The ambiguity fueled speculation. Still, a central question haunted investigators: if Aaron was unwell, why did his friends let him go alone? The search report noted this repeatedly. Greg and Joe insisted Aaron insisted on going alone. "He brushed us off," Joe told police. Said he knew the trail like his backyard. But when GPS logs and radio transcripts were reviewed, Aaron's disorientation became clear. He was likely lost well before sunset and never told his friends exactly where he had turned. More troubling, though, was what came after. After Aaron went silent, Joe and Greg continued hunting, even processing a kill. They moved camp, retrieved the elk, and only when they returned home did they act. Joe's first message to Aaron, "I will call you tonight," seemed hopeful, but Greg's reply was curt, "Don't call till you sober up." This exchange, found in their group text thread, revealed resentment, maybe frustration, but also a failure to grasp the seriousness of the situation. In retrospect, their actions weren't criminal, but they were damning in their complacency. The sheriff, when later asked about it, said, "No law was broken, but judgment failed." It would take almost 2 years to find Aaron's remains. By then, the trail had gone cold, not just literally, but in every possible sense. The deeper the investigation dug, the more the wilderness seemed to mirror Aaron's own internal chaos, remote, unmapped, and unforgiving. By late September, the official search had lost momentum. Snow had begun to blanket the high trails, and helicopters could no longer navigate the changing winds that swirled through the canyons of the Crazy Mountains. The search teams, frustrated and freezing, were pulled back. Hope was dimming, and yet not everyone stopped looking. Local rancher Charlie Rain, whose family had worked the nearby land for generations, never forgot the face on the missing person posters. In the spring of 2015, he and his father-in-law were repairing a fence near the edge of their grazing land when they saw something, an oddly placed thermos and what looked like camouflage fabric, resting beneath a tree. Nearby was a bow, a torn field journal, and a hunting license bearing Aaron Hedges' name. Charlie called it in immediately. The scene was eerie. Aaron's gear was arranged almost deliberately, propped rather than discarded. His backpack leaned against the tree, like someone had intended to return. Yet there was no sign of Aaron himself. No blood, no bones, just silence and scattered belongings, half buried in last year's leaves. Months later, in August 2016, hikers from a nearby Dude Ranch spotted something else: bones. A skull partially hidden beneath a dead pine. As authorities were called in, more remains were discovered, including fragments of clothing and a cell phone. The site was roughly 40 yards from where Aaron's gear had been found. Nearby bare scat and disturbed earth suggested that at some point his body may have been partially buried by wildlife. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as exposure. No trauma, no foul play, just a man alone in the wilderness, undone by nature and perhaps his own unraveling mind. But some things still didn't fit. Why had Aaron doubled back after leaving his campfire site? Why had he never activated his cell phone or sought help from one of the nearby ranches? His backpack was found within miles of several properties. Civilization was within reach. Yet Aaron had remained invisible until long after he had died. The woods had kept his secret for nearly 2 years, and even after discovery, the mystery lingered, not in how Aaron Hedges had died, but why. In the months following discovery, several questions haunted investigators and those who knew Aaron. Records showed that his prescription for anti-craving medication intended to ease alcohol withdrawal had been untouched in his bag. The syringe remained full. No doses taken since leaving home. This suggested he arrived at the mountains unprepared and unwilling to confront the coming challenge. If he was avoiding detox, but also suffering from withdrawal, what drove him to hike deeper into harsh wilderness? Friends and family described him as a man nearing breaking point. They said he was drinking heavily in the months before attempting to stop with pills. His mood swings had worsened. Paranoia crept in. He spoke of needing solitude, of escaping the pressure at home. He sought silence, but wasn't ready for the brutality of it. Had he believed the mountains could save him, search sites and scattered evidence painted a loosely connected trail. His abandoned thermos, the bow and field notes, the single boot found near snow-covered earth, each fragment signaled effort, intention, then disorientation. The final campsite, the small fires, the water purifier, the shredded camelback bladder were close to an old trail. He was somewhere between choosing help and vanishing from sight. The discovery of his skull brought closure for authorities. They could declare him deceased, but the why remained elusive. Officially, the cause exposure. Yet in informal conversations, local rangers believed that his death was inevitable the day he walked off alone. They noted how he likely toggled between warmth and cold, stumbling between hope and derangement. Volunteer firefighters and survival experts consulted river flow maps and hikers' cell coverage logs. They identified 3 small cabins and a remote switchback road within a few miles of where his gear was found. All were abandoned cabins or ranch lands. Some had abandoned radios, old batteries, even firewood for a winter's night. But none were visited in earnest during the rainy autumn season. Aaron might have seen lights, or thought he did, passing them on a lonely dusk, but chose to keep going. The idea that he just died of cold felt too simplistic to many. PTSD from personal fallout, fear of returning home, beaten by addiction. Perhaps he chose to disappear deeper, allowed himself to become untethered. People spoke of him as a ghost who walked downhill to die, who didn't ask for help because it felt like defeat. Public fascination with the hunter who vanished wasn't just about the mystery, it was about our deepest wilderness fears, when our own mind becomes stranger than the woods. Online forums speculated that he had made it to a cabin, but became delirious, missed the door, and died on the porch. Others argued he sold his gear and disappeared only to die elsewhere under minor fall weather. But evidence his bones found near scattered gear offered the strongest case for exposure. Aaron's family, however, declined to speak publicly. They released a short statement. "Our hearts remain with the truth, whatever it is." That became a quiet echo. The mountains held silence more stubborn than sorrow. Routine memorial hikes took place in spring. Friends placed a simple plaque at the trailhead. "Remember Aaron Hedges, man of wild hopes and troubled mind." A handful of hikers left tokens, a flask, a camo patch, until the plaque was stolen. Even nature seemed ambivalent about memorials in its domain. Investigators emphasized that if someone walked into similar wilderness today, disoriented in early withdrawal, inadequately clothed, there may still be no rescue. The Aaron Hedges story became a cautionary tale taught in rescue training programs. Wilderness isn't forgiving of chaos, mental or physical, but for the rest of us, the story lingers like a cold gust across pine needles. A man hungry for redemption and anonymity who disappeared into mountains that took without asking. We may never fully know what he told himself or why he didn't stop. But perhaps the hardest truth is that not all mysteries are meant to be solved, and not all disappearances are crimes. Some are just bones in the snow and echoes in empty cabins. In the months that passed since Aaron's remains were found, whispers and rumors drifted across hunting lodges and backcountry forums. Some still couldn't accept the official verdict exposure. They asked instead about unanswered anomalies, the missing boot, the false coordinates, the unclaimed cabin that had once supplied firewood. But others saw his story not as an unsolved riddle, but as a cautionary echo, a man unraveled by inner demons, overtaken by wilderness and silence alike. Rescue authorities updated their protocols, citing Aaron's disappearance as a case study. When hunters request search and rescue coverage, they now ask, have you taken prescription medications? Are you mentally fit? What emergency communication devices do you carry? And in classrooms, wilderness guides teach the hard lesson. No one goes solo into the wild while unstable, whether physically or mentally. In the Hedges family's quiet neighborhood, spring brought renewed grief. They planted an apple tree hoping its blossoms could offer new life and hope, even as the pines in the high country retained their quiet secret. They funded a small scholarship in Aaron's name, aimed at helping men recovering from addiction to take professional wilderness therapy, turning a tragedy into a path for healing. Among those who'd hiked the trails near Sunlight and Moose Lakes, occasional signs appeared. A faded orange ribbon, a small hand-carved token, a log entry in a ranger's notebook. Remember the cautionary tale, seek help before you vanish. Rangers found that hikers were now more vigilant, checking weather gear lists and even their own emotional readiness before venturing out. That intangible shift awareness felt like a tribute. Still, speculation persisted. Some believed Aaron had headed downhill intentionally, using his hunting license to blend in with ranch staff, then walked into a town, sipped whiskey, and vanished forever. Others imagined he reached one of those abandoned cabins. Something malfunctioned, a stove caught fire. Smoke filled his lungs, and he died inside, leaving bones unexposed until the elements revealed him later. But forensic inconsistency, the weather timeline, the scattered gear, reaffirmed exposure as the likeliest cause. No evidence pointed to foul play. Local reporters revisited the case every autumn. They interviewed park personnel who'd scoured the area, recalling how the first snow had baffled them, stashes of gear frozen in, as if Aaron had lingered then kept moving. Cabins, they said, offered warmth, but only if you knew they were there. One ranger quoted in the woods, "You can be on the trail and still be off the map." In mental health circles, Aaron's story became symbolic of a complex truth. Addiction isn't only physical, it's mental, emotional, and situational. A man driven by deficit, his marriage crumbling, his pride fractured, seeking solace in the brutal honesty of the wild. That wilderness demanded clarity he didn't have. The silence that hunters prize, when what you truly hear is your own mind, is what eventually broke him. The final file marked the case as closed. The bones had been cataloged and placed with his other personal effects. Bow boots, field notes, all returned to his brother. A simple marker was placed in a small cemetery plot near his hometown. No gravestone stood except the metal nameplate on a concrete slab. It read only Aaron Hedges, 1976-2014. Lost to the mountains, loved always. In the end, the real mystery wasn't how he died, it was why he went. For those who knew him, the signs had been there, the trips to empty places, the dark moods, the desperation in his eyes, when he'd said, "I just need one trip where I don't have to be anyone else." The forest offered anonymity and perhaps an expectation that you'd find yourself again. But if your sense of self is already dissolving, losing track of time becomes losing track of everything. The wilderness doesn't judge, but it doesn't hide your failure. Aaron's disappearance became a mirror. It spoke to the solace seekers, the overconfident hunters, the wounded veterans, the broken souls who walk away from help, thinking the mountains can fix what the world couldn't. And sometimes they do, but sometimes you stay behind and the pines keep growing, erasing every sign. Long after Aaron's story slipped from headlines, hikers still paused at one junction Sunlight Trail to Moose Lake, reading a small sign. May this silence remind us to carry more than pride. May this mountain remind us we are not alone. And for those who pass by the mountains, whisper a quieter question when you walk into the wild. Are you walking toward peace, or lost inside your own mind? The trail goes on. The trees don't tell. They just stand there, patient, watching.